Being agnostic is the stupidest thing you can do. And yes, we're gonna talk about Jesus. It takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a Christian. And if you're an agnostic, you're even worse because you're choosing ignorance. And
Okay, Mr. Roid Rage. Maybe before making this video and getting mad at agnostics and atheists, and essentially just like misrepresenting their position or any position that pertains to the creation of men, you could have just done your workout, chilled out, managed and addressed your emotions, and then made a calm video rather than calling people stupid and not understanding the material at hand. First and foremost, when it comes to the position of being agnostic or atheist, I'm always going to jump in and protect the atheists and agnostics, right? And I just want everybody out there to know that there's nothing wrong with remaining agnostic when it comes to anything that is ever discussed, right? All agnosticism really means, right, is when asked whether God exists, somebody is simply saying that, like, I don't know whether God exists, and I'm not sure if we really have enough information to ever really know whether God exists. All of the evidence that is presented to an individual that is agnostic doesn't really compel them to believe that a God exists. And maybe they might even make the declaration that we might never know that God exists, or like we can never know that God exists. I don't really think that there's anything wrong with being in that stance, especially given that in the world that we live in, right? Like this world that we live in doesn't really have compelling evidence to make someone believe that any gods exist, specifically the Christian God, right? Please present to me how, which you kind of failed to do in this video while you were screaming on the whatever was empowering you to scream the way that you did. So first and foremost, to address your car analogy, right? Like, you're saying agnostics are stupid, but you're stupid, right? Like, if you're going to convince people to come to Christianity, then you should be able to probably use better analogies than the one that you used, right? The one that you used was absolutely like horrid. Most people who believe in like evolution over billions and millions and millions and millions of years, right? Those people don't believe that we just walked outside and threw a bunch of pieces together and randomly, like, human beings came into existence. You dumb. Essentially what evolution is, right, is over the period of time of millions of years. Essentially what you have is organisms reproducing and genetically mutating in order to create new genetics and new features, new aspects of what that biological entity is, right? This thing didn't happen overnight. This thing happened via trial and error for millions and millions and millions of years. And of course, there's like other factors that contribute to like what organisms end up living on to pass on their traits or any mutated traits that they were born with genetically. You have things like survival of the fittest, and over millions and millions of years, tons and tons of species have gone extinct that we no longer see anymore. But the species that were like fit and able to, continue on and reproduce, those are the species that are gonna like go on as time exists, right? But evolution, that has nothing to really do with evolution. Evolution is simply these organisms reproducing and passing on their traits as the genes inside of them mutate. Now, the second part of this is you mentioning that, like, in the Bible, it says that God's qualities have been clearly seen. And like, when we look at the sky, we know that God exists. My question is, why the would I give a about like what the Bible says? Like, it literally means jack shit to me. I don't really care what a book says about like the world and whether God exists, especially when this book was written by men who were getting their instructions from God, and God had more of a preference over people mixing fabrics rather than to be against people owning people, right? Like, why would I give a what that book has to say? The same book that illustrates a God that gave people prescriptions to go and wipe out entire civilizations. The same book that tells people to go and attack people who fall in love with the same sex. That's something that God cared more about than like owning people, right? And lastly, like, why would I care about like a book that can't even get its story straight when it comes to like how the world was created? It gets things messed up that we can clearly observe with like science, like what came first, water, sunlight, plants, if all of that shit. And also this same book depicts how God like completely floods the entire planet because he's angry with his creation, to somehow get rid of sin, only for sin to come back. So that was just kind of like a waste of time. What I'm trying to say is, like, why would I care about this book that describes a God that's so wrathful and just doesn't really get correct and doesn't really represent like some kind of like divine piece of work, but more so the writings of men living during a barbaric time? Also, another mistake that you made, you said that all of this is coming from an explosion. I can't emphasize this enough. Literally, nobody who believes in the Big Bang believes that all of this came from an explosion. So you're literally talking about stuff that you have no idea about. The Big Bang is not an explosion. The Big Bang is an expansion. That's the terminology that's used by people who believe in the Big Bang or trust the Big Bang theory. And you have so many issues with like trusting the Big Bang theory, but you literally forget that this theory was proposed by a Roman Catholic physicist. Oh, let me say this again. This theory was proposed by a Christian or Roman Catholic physicist. And there's plenty of evidence to literally justify why we believe in the Big Bang theory or trust the Big Bang theory. But given this video and how you called the Big Bang an explosion, you clearly aren't reading the material. You clearly haven't done any research. And I say this all the time, I'm not a big reader, but at least I can do a Google search and read some articles. And then, you end your video by saying that like atheists and agnostics have more faith than you. No, that's not necessarily the case. We're looking at the evidence that justifies the Big Bang theory, the evidence that justifies evolution, and that's why we trust these things. You believe in a God that you literally cannot substantiate or provide any evidence of actually existing, and you assume that God created everything and started the universe. And agnostics, atheists, we just don't have enough evidence to really believe that. Nothing to sway us or compel us to believe that. Feel free to like prove me wrong or like demonstrate, but like literally you seem to have more faith in believing in this thing that you can't really justify, while we are believing in things that we can look at empirical data, and that compels us to believe that these things actually work. So I don't know, that's all I had to say. Sorry for the long video, and yeah, I was just bored at 1 a.m. in the morning and decided to film this and edit it and post it. I figured I might give it a shot. Also, feel free to comment below and tell me if I've made any mistakes. I'm a little bit tired, and maybe some of the points I made weren't really great. I'm doing this off of the top of my head, so...